Welcome back, you're with Terry from Bonsai Tree, and today I'm going to be doing a makeover of a Shimpaku which I originally imported and then sold to a customer. About 2 seasons ago I repotted the tree, and since then the tree's been allowed to gain in vigor. Today it's possible to do the makeover styling. If you find the following content helpful, then you can thank me by clicking the thanks button just below the video. This strong runner is a very good indication of the health of the tree. This foliage in contrast is weak foliage and can be removed because it is not contributing anything to the tree. There was no juvenile needle foliage on this juniper to be found because it hasn't been worked on for a number of years. But it is never a good idea to start styling a tree, especially to this extent, if the tree is still displaying a juvenile foliage. It is better to wait until the tree is putting out adult foliage again, and then you may proceed with the makeover. The tree does present a few challenges. For instance, in the apex you have multiple branches originating from a single point, or at least very close to one another. There are also multiple instances where branches are growing directly above one another. As a result, these branches that are at the top are shading out the lower branch, and thus the lower branch is becoming progressively weaker. On the tree are a number of dried out stubs which remain from branches that must have been removed in previous stylings. To make these stubs look a little bit more interesting and of course more natural, I'm going to use a variety of tools to turn them into gin. To prevent tearing the fibers too far down on the trunk, I'm going to use a blade just to score the edge of the shari that I'm creating. I will then use a very blunt chisel to remove the bark. After lengthy study of this tree, I've decided to remove this lower branch moving to the right. There were several reasons for this. The girth of this branch was too thick in comparison to the fairly feminine appearance of the trunk line. The bow-like shape that it creates as it develops from the trunk is not very appealing. I also felt that as a first right branch it was too low. A branch slightly higher up in the tree would perform the balancing function of this important branch better. I also decided to remove this back branch. It was essentially intersecting a branch that was developing from higher up in the tree that was in a better angle. The next step is to remove weaker growth generally on the interior or on the underside of branches. This will allow better sun penetration and in turn will promote vigor in the branches. Thinning of the tree has now been completed. The next step will be to wire it. My preference when styling conifers is to use copper wire. Using wire stays can be very helpful when repositioning heavier structural portions of the tree. In a case like this, a gin can also be very useful to anchor the wire stay onto. I always like to twist the wire stay just to give it a neater appearance, and also I believe it's stronger with the wire coiled. You should always approach wiring with a bit of a strategy in mind. For instance, if you know that you have growth on a branch which is going to be better orientated if you were able to twist the branch, then wire the branch accordingly so that when you twist it, the wire tightens on the branch instead of loosening. Sometimes it's not necessary to wire all the way to the tip of a branch if wiring only, for instance, halfway is enough to position it. Always try to avoid wrapping the foliage with wire. Wrapped foliage will usually die and often becomes a home for pests. With wiring now completed, I can proceed to the next step, which is to position the branches. For now, the strategy is to bend the structural portions of the tree into position so that they will act as a scaffolding to build the future ramification and foliage onto. This means these structural pieces need to be spaced relatively evenly apart, which will promote the sunlight penetrating into the interior of the tree and produce back budding. That back budding will make it possible for me to reduce the leggier branches and also to build up the ramification. As a considerable amount of foliage has been removed from this tree, I decided to keep as much of the vigorous foliage as I possibly could, even if it was growing to the bottom. I also did not cut any of the runners or any of the growing tips in an effort to preserve the auxins, the growing hormones that are in those tips, until at least in late spring or perhaps summer, when we will consider whether to prune it back, depending on the response of the tree now. If you found that content helpful and you'd like to thank me for it, please do so now by clicking the thanks button just below the video. I'm very happy with the outcome of this makeover, and although a lot of foliage was removed, I'm very comfortable that the tree will remain very vigorous and healthy. There may be some production of juvenile foliage, but that is to be expected. If a lot of juvenile foliage is produced, we will then wait before doing any further work on the tree until it starts to put on adult foliage once again. My first and directional branch I actually ended up raising slightly. This served to increase the visual width of the canopy, with the directional flow of this tree obviously being from the right to the left. In future, my aim would be to reduce the canopy on the right hand side and shift the visual weight to the left. In addition, the outline of the left-hand side of the apex should also be compacted. I would like to strengthen the first branch, and so this should be positioned facing the sun as much as possible. The foliage pad just above the first branch should also perhaps be extended slightly so as to reduce the amount of negative space. The foliage pads in future will also be better defined and of course denser. Simply cleaning up the bottom of the foliage pads will also make them more crisp and better defined, but we chose to keep that foliage on this particular occasion.